The Honorable, the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisessa, SC, MP, Member for Superior. The Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, MP, Member for Aruka Maloney. And Mrs. Vidya Gayadeen Gopi Singh, MP, Member for Urupuch West, have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers.
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. The administrative reports of the Ministry of National Security for the periods October 2014 to September 2015 and October 2015 to September 2016. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lead the following papers. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the interim report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on the examination into the processing of payment of pension and gratuity to retired public officers and contracted employees. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 14th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee into the examination of the audited accounts, balance sheet, and other financial statements of the National Commission for Self-Help Limited for the financial years 2008 to 2015. The second ministerial response of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to the 17th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards for the financial years 2009 to 2013. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Reports from committees.
Member for Miaro.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the state of the agriculture and fisheries industry in Tobago, with specific focus on the levels of participation in the industries and the output of farmers.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Member for Miaro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 1 to the Minister of National Security. Given the warning of a harsh dry season by the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service and the already high presence of bushfires, could the Minister indicate when will the fire tenders at the Miaro and Rio Claro fire stations be properly functioning?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I must register my disappointment with my friend from Mayaro, having seen this first surface in a statement from him to the media, reported in yesterday's newspaper. When I did an inquiry and a check, there was no correspondence from him previously to either the fire service or myself asking for the answer. So now in the full public glare, I will answer. There is, in fact, a working application in the Mayaro station, and the Rio Claro fire station's appliance is working. There's an issue with the pump, which will be repaired over the course of this weekend. Of course, we will remember the Mayaro fire station and its unfortunate genesis with a falling sign upon the opening during a certain period.
Tell member from Yaro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, are you aware that the tender in Rio Claro, the engine in that vessel is in that vehicle is not functioning? So,
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, as I've just indicated, according to the Chief Fire Officer, who is not the member for Mayaro, the fire tender in Mayaro is working. The fire tender in Rio Claro is working, save for a pump, which has nothing to do with the engine, as just indicated by the member for Mayaro.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, could the Minister state how soon CARICOM expects to bring the parties to the negotiating table, and whether this position is still relevant, given that President Nicolas Maduro has said that he will not hold new elections, and that Mr. Juan Guaido has been barred by the Venezuelan courts from leaving Venezuela?
Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
Madam Speaker, considering that my colleagues on the other side spent all their time trying to undermine the national initiative with respect to finding mediation as a replacement for intervention, I'm surprised that he can come here now and asking me about how soon parties will be brought to the table. CARICOM is, Madam Speaker, could you just...
Members, the Prime Minister must be heard. Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, CARICOM is in no position to bring anybody to the table, and therefore I will not attempt to answer any question and give any date to allow him to spin any wheel about the date has passed. What is happening, Madam Speaker, has been made public across the region, at the UN, and here in Trinidad and Tobago, that CARICOM has initiated diplomatic interventions to put an alternative to the situation whereby mediation is being offered, meaningful dialogue and negotiations are to follow. And Madam Speaker, as a result of our initiative, other countries who have taken the non-interventionist position, countries that have abstained from taking sides, Madam Speaker, those countries are now in a position to and have accepted the initiative, and in the very near future, more definitive information would be available with respect to the initiatives of Uruguay, Mexico, and CARICOM.
Madam Speaker, I object to the Prime Minister putting improper motives to the UNC. And here's the question. What is...
Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I'll ask you to please withdraw.
I withdraw that statement, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Naparima, supplemental question. You have 15 seconds.
Right. What, to the Prime Minister, what is government's thinking on President Maduro's statement on Russian TV that under no circumstances he would hold fresh elections in Venezuela?
Madam Speaker, this government has no responsibility for what President Maduro or any person says on any TV.
I say this to both sides. When a member gets up to speak, I would like both sides to recognize Standing Order 53. Supplemental.
Have either the government of Trinidad and Tobago or CARICOM reached out to interim President Juan Guaido to determine whether he's amenable to CARICOM's mediation?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, this country's position is crystal clear. We have opened our doors at CARICOM speaking with one voice to all sides in the Venezuelan issue under the understanding that the difficulties in Venezuela are a matter for the people of Venezuela.
Member for Oropuch East.
The question? Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of National Security, Given that the Order of Merit list has a life of 1 year, could the Minister indicate when the Parliament will debate the nomination of Her Excellency the President for the appointment of a Deputy Commissioner of Police?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as all members should be aware, because it's set out very clearly in the law, an Order of Merit list has a shelf life of 1 year. The Order of Merit list expired on the 23rd of January, 2019.
Supplementary member for Urupuch East.
Thank you, Minister, for clarifying that the Order of Merit list was allowed to expire before Parliament debated the nominations. But what Minister, do you expect to happen now, since that merit list has expired without Parliament addressing the appointment? What is the next step that should happen now?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, there will be a new process, and it will start over.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, there are 4 questions for oral answer, and the government is prepared to answer all 4. Thank you very much.
Member for Point of Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 63 to the Minister of Trade and Industry. Number 37, sorry, to the Minister of Trade and Industry.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Trade and Industry, answer to question 37. The Ministry of Finance is in the process of procuring consultancy services to implement and manage the Business Development Incentive Program. As such, the disbursement of grants has not commenced. It is expected that this program will be fully operationalized in 2019. Thank you very much.
Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Question number 63 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. To my friend for Barataria Sawo, the answer to question A, 63A, the number of murders committed from 2015 to 2018, 420 murders were reported in 2015, 463 in 2016, 495 in 2017, 517 in 2018. Part B, number of murderers apprehended for each year identified in Part A. Just to correct it, Madam Speaker, a person is presumed innocent until convicted, so we don't call them murderers, but persons where there are allegations of them having committed the murder. 77 persons were apprehended for murder in 2015, 106 in 2016, 123 in 2017, 110 persons apprehended for murder in 2018. Answer to 63C, ratio of number of murderers detected to the number of murders committed from 2015 to 2018. Detection rate for murders was 18% in 2015, 18% in 2016, 20% in 2017, 17% in 2018.
Supplemental member for Barataria.
Minister, could you tell me if the DNA lab is up and running and functional?
I really would not allow that as a supplemental question. Any other question? Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Question number 64 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Answer to Part A. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago sold 1,501 million, or 1.501 billion US dollars to authorized dealers in calendar year 2018, as compared to 1,550 or 1.55 billion US dollars in 2010, 1.475 billion US dollars in 2011, 1.785 billion US dollars in 2012, 1.315 billion dollars in US dollars in 2013, 1.715 billion US dollars in 2014, and $2.641 billion US dollars in 2015. That's answer to part A. Answer to part B. Confidentiality obligations in the Central Bank and Exchange Controls Act restrict the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, or myself, from disclosing information on individual financial institutions. Answer to part C. The financial services system used a total of $1.205 billion US dollars to meet credit card foreign obligations in 2018. Comparable data for the period 2010 to 2015 are as follows. In 2010, there were $343 million in credit card transactions. In 2011, $376 million US dollars in credit card transaction, foreign obligations. In 2012, $539 million US dollars in credit card foreign obligations. In 2013, 531 million credit card foreign obligation transactions. In 2014, 641 million foreign credit card obligations. And in 2015, 766 million transactions in credit card foreign obligations. Answer to part B. As stated earlier, confidentiality obligations in the Central Bank and Exchange Controls Act restrict the Central Bank from disclosing information on individual financial institutions. However, the commercial bank's net foreign position, defined as commercial banks' aggregate foreign currency assets that they hold, less the foreign currency liabilities that they are obligated to, was $2.734 billion at the end of the third quarter of 2018. So net foreign currency assets in the commercial banks, $2.734 US dollars at the end of the third quarter of 2018. Comparable data for the period 2010 to 2015 is as follows. 2010, $1.458 billion in net foreign currency assets. 2011, $1.768 billion in net foreign currency assets in the commercial banks. 2012, $2.437 billion US dollars net in the commercial banks. 2013, 2.342 net foreign currency assets in our local commercial banks. 2014, 2.276 billion in net 2.276 billion in net foreign currency assets in the commercial banking sector. And 2015, 2.697 net foreign currency assets in the commercial banking sector. And just as an aside, the current number of US 2.734 in 2018 is the highest in the last 5 years.
Supplemental member for Padarath.
Supplemental, Minister, could you then tell me if that is such a net, as I say, profit, why is there such a shortage of foreign exchange for day-to-day transactions to the general public?
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, that question requires speculation. Please pose the question in the proper manner, and I will answer it.
Member for Caroni East.
Honorable Minister, what would you say would account for the increase in credit cards payment in US dollars from 2015 $766 billion, which you quoted, to 2.64 to 1.205 in 2018? What would you say accounted for the increase in credit card payments?
Madam Speaker, that is in fact a matter that is engaging the Ministry of Finance in our regular meetings with the Central Bank. We discussed that just this week, and we are going to do some further analysis to determine what is the cause of the increase in the use of credit cards for US dollar transactions. The initial response from the practitioners is that more and more purchases are being made online as opposed to in the traditional retail sector. So more and more persons in Trinidad and Tobago are using their credit card to purchase goods and services online, as in the past when persons would go to a traditional retail store.
Supplemental, member for Carneys.
Would you say, Honorable Minister, you were leading to the answer, but would you say that is attributable to the difficulty in obtaining foreign reserves by the business sector, so they are using their credit cards? So that will possibly lead you to one of the answers you are seeking.
Minister of Finance.
Yeah, I would not want to speculate. It's a complex matter. There's absolutely no doubt that there's a shift in cultural patterns in Trinidad and Tobago and a shift towards online purchases. This is happening all over the world. It's happening in the United States. You'll have seen a number of shopping malls that are closing down. So we are part of a worldwide trend towards e-commerce and online banking and so on. So I would not want to give you a definitive answer. If you want to pose that particular question to me, by the time I'm ready to answer it, I will have the information from the commercial banking sector.
Member for Barataria-Sanwan.
Question number 65 to the Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development plays a strategic role in fulfilling government's labour, employment and entrepreneurship commitments with the aim of maintaining industrial peace, facilitating decent work and improving the quality of life of all persons in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the critical targets associated with the Sustainable Development Goal 8 is to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all, for which the ministry plays a pivotal role in fulfilling in Trinidad and Tobago with regards to its obligation to protect labor rights and promote safe and secure working environments for all workers, including migrant workers, in particular women migrants and those in precarious employment. To give effect to this, the ministry seeks to ensure the protection, safety, and health of workers as articulated in government's official policy framework through the implementation of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Chapter 8808. The OSH Authority Agency is responsible for the enforcement of the OSH Act and conduct inspections on companies for compliance. Companies that conduct their undertakings within Trinidad and Tobago are also inspected for compliance. To date, the OSH agency conducted investigations at the following ministries and state agencies: the Urban Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, UDECOT, National Insurance Property Development Company, NIPDEC, Ministry of Works and Transport, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and Water and Sewerage Authority. Inspections were also conducted on Chinese companies that are contracted by the above-named ministries and state agencies who operate within Trinidad and Tobago in accordance with the requirements of the OSH Act. Notice of undertaking, building, operation, or works of engineering construction, Section 63, which is on Form 15. Application for approval of building plans of factory or warehouse, Section 59.1. Notice of accident, Section 46, and reports of complaints. Madam Speaker, additionally, the ministry, through the Labor Inspectorate Unit, is also responsible for the protection of workers and to ensure that proper terms and conditions of employment are met. This is accomplished through the monitoring and enforcement of the following pieces of labor legislation. 1, the Minimum Wages Act, Chapter 8804, and the Minimum Wages Order. 2, Maternity Protection Act, Chapter 4557, and 3, Children's Act 2012, Part 14. The Labor Inspectorate Unit conducts inspection and investigation of complaints of all establishments that fall under its jurisdiction. The unit has received and responded to a large number of complaints that are lodged each year. For fiscal year 2018, a total of 283 complaints were received. To date, the unit has not received any complaints from workers employed by Chinese companies contracted by ministries and state agencies. However, mechanisms are in place to address any issues that may arise that fall under the purview of the Labor Inspectorate Unit. Madam Speaker, in monitoring the compliance of these Chinese companies, and particularly the working conditions of migrant workers, two of the challenges that have been identified are the language barrier and the lack of policy guidelines specific to migrant workers. However, in 2018, an interministerial committee for the development of a labor migration policy for Trinidad and Tobago was established under the purview of this ministry by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. One of the mandates of this interministerial committee is the development of a labor migration policy for Trinidad and Tobago. With regards to the language barrier, the ministry will seek to explore the use of technology devices to translate between languages during field visits in real time, both verbally and written. Madam Speaker, with regards to B, as mentioned earlier, companies.
Speaking time is now expired. Supplemental?
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 17 of the House of Representatives, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the House today for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely, the continued recognition of the government of Trinidad and Tobago of Nicolas Maduro as President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The matter is definite because it pertains to the expressed, unwavering, and persistent recognition by the government of Trinidad and Tobago towards the Nicolas Maduro regime.
1 minute, please, member. Honorable members, the dinner is growing. I'm having difficulty hearing the member for Princestown. Continue.
Thank you, Madam. Madam, the matter is definite because it pertains to the expressed, unwavering, and persistent recognition by the government of Trinidad and Tobago towards the Nicolas Maduro regime in Venezuela, where people are being denied their basic human rights and their country faces economic ruin. It is urgent because should the government maintain this position, Trinidad and Tobago could face sanctions by our largest trade partners and risk isolation by many developed countries which no longer recognize the Maduro regime. The matter is of public importance because if this situation is allowed to continue, it will lead to the collapse of diplomatic relations, trade agreements, national security support, food imports, and visas from many countries, thereby having a disastrous effect on Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, I am not satisfied that this matter qualifies under this standing order. I advise that a member may pursue this matter under Standing Order 16.
Statements by ministers.
Madam Speaker, with your leave and with the concurrence of the Chief Whip, the Minister of Finance will be making a statement later on the proceedings. I thank you very much. At 4:15.
Okay, so honorable members, the matter of the statement by the Minister of Finance will be deferred till 4:15.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister. Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that an act to repeal and replace the Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, establish a National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, and for other related matters be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, I rise today really to pilot the work of my colleague, the member for Aruka Maloney, who has dedicated a very significant portion of intellect, effort, and commitment to improving a matter of central concern for Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, Madam Speaker, the Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, which is an Act of Parliament number 26 of the year 1952, now some 67 years old, provides for a statistician, so named under the legislation, to conduct the business of taking census and for collecting, compiling, analyzing, and publishing statistical information in relation to Trinidad and Tobago. The central functionality of statistics in any society cannot be overstated. Governments are run, budgets are run, estimations of trajectory, of movement out of poverty and into prosperity, of furthering education, of analyzing the healthcare system, of looking to ourselves as a people, reside in our statistics. For statistics to be meaningful, there must be trust in statistical creation, consideration, and publication. If there is no trust, then we fall into the realm of speculation, and we therefore cause our economy and our society and our politics to be retarded from development or in development. The CSO, as it's referred to, created under the Statistics Act, Chapter 1902 in the year 1952, some 67 years ago, produced population and vital statistics, economic statistics, national accounts, social statistics, labor force statistics, agriculture statistics, geographical information statistics. This allows us an insight into religion, sex, ethnicity, age, structure, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, business statistics in trade and import and export, travel, tourism, retail price index, producer price index, domestic price index, indices of retail sales, our gross domestic product, our current and constant prices, education, crime, traffic, our livestock, poultry, and our spatial data on population, buildings, households, and businesses. I've taken the time to reflect upon material created by our Central Statistical Office, which is a division comprising some 300 people across 8 particular divisions, 4 of which are structured and 4 of which are in support of the 4 structured divisions, to give an indication of how wide the work product of the Central Statistics Office really is. The data dissemination produced by the CSO is responsible for the production of reports including Annual Statistics Digest, Pocket Statistics Digest, Trinidad and Tobago Human Development Atlas, Population and Housing Census Report, Demographic Census Report, Household Budgetary Support, National Income Report, Economic Activity Report, Labor Force Report, Trade Bulletin, Survey of Establishments Report, Agriculture Report, Agriculture Census Report, etc. Crime Statistics Report, Annual Traffic Report. But statistics, Madam Speaker, I dare say, have been with us since biblical times. In terms of recorded, well-known, traverse literature, we are told that the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ happened under the census then afoot. And the obligation was to travel to one's place of birth to have that record done as the journey to Nazareth was in gear. So, Madam Speaker, the fact is we accept that the work product of the National Statistics Framework is a critical product. So where are we and why are we here with a bill? I'd like to say, Madam Speaker, that in the late 90s, Trinidad and Tobago really began to suffer the difficulties of an improper organization of our central statistics arrangements. It's true to say then that in or around 1997 to 1999, certainly we were having difficulties, inadequate numbers, diminished capacity of technical staff, failure of the Institute to respond in a timely manner to new market-related data requests, difficulty in coordinating data production activities, standards and statistical systems, reduction of cooperation from suppliers of data, and I underscore that, reduction in responses, erosion of confidence by data users, and the creation of secondary data sources, an outdated structure, lack of information technology. And Madam Speaker, certainly a PNM government in the year 2004, anchored in the year 2005, a very important introduction to improving this phenomenon observed. And it was then government in tow in 2005 that ensured that the Ministry of Planning and Development awarded an important consultancy which has been with us for a while. This was to the entity known as Statistics Sweden. It's an international consulting office. And they were retained to identify an appropriate model for the restructuring of the CSO. That work product was in the period 2005 to 2006. Between 2006 to 2007, a plan of action was created. The proposed modern structure was developed. The system mechanism was analyzed. The brief for the drafting of the legislation was created. In the period 2008 to 2009, the CSO undertook an internal review. They studied the work by Statistics Sweden. They created a gap analysis in respect of the structures. And then we had the change in 2010. In the period 2010 to 2012, the then Ministry of Planning, first under Mary King and then under my colleague Carney Central's tenure, we saw some analysis happen. In 2012, Statistics Sweden was returned to Trinidad and Tobago for a 13-month period, and they were tasked with three main tasks. Firstly, to define the core products to be delivered through the CSO. Secondly, to design the organization structure. And thirdly, to create the IT, the Information Technology Master Plan. In 2013, that Statistics Sweden consultancy, of course, reaffirmed the value of the CSO, and in its report emphasized the need to review and modernize the Act to central focus the issue of independence by an autonomous state operation entity. It recommended the development of a stronger and less hierarchical organization structure. It recommended modern human resource practices, capacity development. It asked for an organizational restructure of information technology and the implementation of robust IT structures. It asked for the development of core products by separating primary deliverables. The Ministry of Planning then entered in 2014 on a particular exercise. Commendably, a management transition team was created. That management transition team went to work with its report. They came up with 6 thematic areas: organizational reform, legislative review, organizational restructuring, technology support and improvement, product development, supply side strengthening. And the documentation produced then under the management transition team included the policy framework for the National Statistics Institute, proposals and recommendations for the legislation to be reformed, the terms of reference for the firm and consortia to begin the design, procurement, and building of the IT system, and then the transition plan, including human resource, IT, etc. Governments changed in the September election in 2015, and immediately my colleague, the Minister of Planning, the member for Aruka Maloney, went to work, brought an immediate product to the Cabinet in December 2015, and asked for the creation of a task force, Madam Speaker. That task force was specifically set up to provide oversight for the legislative framework development, to guide the implementation of the new organizational and governance framework, to retain a consultant to provide comprehensive preliminary training plan, to execute the formal transition plan by the government, importantly, the staff and the main representation union for the CSO, to oversee the development of the updated product portfolio, to retain a consultant to implement the IT system, to establish the board of the NSITT as an entity intended to replace the CSO, to establish a national statistical council. And that management in December 2015 led to Trinidad and Tobago between 2015 migrating then to a 2016 cabinet decision. Our 2016 cabinet decision involved the production of cabinet minute number 1890 of 2016. That was confirmed in December 2016, where we approved a revised policy and legislative brief, where we dealt with the management of the staffing and IT and organizational structures, and where we asked for the Attorney General to then sit and draft the legislation. And as I now report on behalf of my colleague, the content of the bill is now before us. So, Madam Speaker, I'm able to say that the legislative product was materially assisted by two international entities. Firstly, from CARTAC, that's the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center. That's one of 10 IMF regional assistance bodies in the world. And also by ECLAC, which is the Economic Committee for Latin America and the Caribbean, which was of course, which has been long in existence, having been started since in or around the year 1948. So, Madam Speaker, that legislative drafting experience took us, importantly, apart from the two international entities that helped us, we were able to traverse a number of work products, of course that from Central Statistics, that coming from Statistics Sweden, those coming from CARTAC and ECLAC, and importantly, the following jurisdictions: the laws of Jamaica, Canada, Australia, Malta, the United Kingdom, Mexico, Chile, and the CARICOM models, insofar as CARICOM models exist. And what we did effectively was to do a data scrub across each of the legislative platforms. We compared it against our existing Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, and then we came forward with the bill which is before us now. Now, I must indicate that the deficiencies which we seek to manage in this legislative proposal, this legislative product, are intended not only to move what is best practice in statistical management into Trinidad and Tobago laws, but it's intended to do that in the environment of Trinidad and Tobago, our culture, our ethos, our social and political and economic factor consideration. You see, Madam Speaker, as a matter of fact, our country has seen our own statistics office plagued not only by the indignity of having gone from a department, so from a division to a department, and then being almost an assigned ward of several ministries, be it the Ministry of Planning or the Ministry of Finance or any other entity that has held the reins of the statistical office. But there was one point in time, as Carney Central will remember, they were even put out of a building because the occupational health and safety standards were not met, and that building was shut down in the year 2013. That's what I mean by the Trinidad and Tobago context, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, we reflected in this legislative analysis, in the consultants' arrangements, in the work product coming from the period 2005 straight to today's date, on some of the weaknesses in the law. And indeed, when we get to the content of the bill, there are a few things that are quite novel. And perhaps it is an immediate obligation that we just dive straight into the bill. Madam Speaker, the bill is 49 clauses long, 3 schedules, and we are able to say that we have also prepared the regulations that ought to accompany this law in the form of the NSITT Annual Returns Regulations 2018, the NSITT Birth Regulations 2018, the Census Regulations 2018, the NSITT Continuous Household Sample Survey of Population Regulations 2018, the NSITT Coordination of National Statistical System Regulations 2018, the NSITT Employment, Wages, Salaries and Earnings Regulations 2018, the NSITT Release of Microdata Regulations 2018, the NSITT Slaughterhouse Returns Regulations 2018, the NSITT Survey of Business Undertakings and Non-Profit Institutions Serving Households Regulations 2018. Now, I've taken the time to indicate that to demonstrate the work product that has been produced, not only the bill, which is the improvements to the law, but also the regulations, and dare I say, the arrangement for the delegated authority that the director will have in allowing the Registrar General or other specific points to manage the process as we go to legislative improvement. Madam Speaker, there is also the fact that in the legislative construct, what we have done effectively in divisioning out the bill is to, and I want to say this and compliment the drafters of the legislation, of course, excluding myself, because obviously the head of ministry does pilot, does do work, but the technocratic team coming from the Ministry of Planning, sitting with the drafters as we have on a day-by-day basis. I want to pay a significant compliment to them all on a well-arranged and well-scrubbed information. And the Law Revision Committee, the Legislative Review Committee, I apologize, in having sat for many months in scrubbing this product as we sat day by day, hour by hour, in coming up with this law. What we did, Madam Speaker, is to preserve the heart and soul of the law that exists in the National Statistics Act. In particular, I can say now, for the sake of Hansard, that there is a duplication of thematic elements between the existing law and the draft law, the bill. For instance, Section 3, which deals with the establishment of statistical department, is mirrored in the concept of treatment in Clause 6 of the bill, where we deal with the establishment of the National Statistics Institute. Section 4 of the existing law, the duties of the statistician, you can mirror that up with Clause 10 of the bill, which is the duties and functions of the Director General. Clause 30 resembles Section 5. The power to take census in the existing law in Section 5 is equivalent to the taking of the census in Clause 30. Section 6, where we deal with the collection of statistics, mirrors up the mischief treated in Clause 31, where we deal with the collection and publication of official statistics. Section 8 of the existing law, the publication of statistics, matches up with Clause 39 of the legislation of the bill, which treats with the publication of metadata. Section 9 of the Act deals with restrictions on publication of individual returns, and that is to be mirrored with Clause 36 of the bill, which treats with restrictions on publication of individual returns. Section 10 of the Parent Act, of the primary law, which we seek to repeal and replace, which deals with the power to require persons to supply information, mirrors Clause 35, which is the power to require persons to supply information. We get to the power of entry, which no doubt my colleagues will have a considerable amount of reflection upon, in Section 11 of the existing law, is equivalent to Clause 36 with the power of entry in our bill, and Part 7, which treats with a standalone creation of offences, mirrors up with what we find in Section 12 of the existing law for offence statement and treatment. Regulations in Section 13 of the existing law match up with the regulations at Clause 46, and we, of course, have the oath of office similarities, Section 14 of the existing law with 38 of the bill, Section 16 of the existing law for the appeals with respect to the statistician output against appeals in Clause 43. And finally, Section 17, the delegation of functions, matching up to Clause 44 of the bill. Now, I've said that to allow members to understand that we have chosen an hierarchical structure which is very easy to read if you look at the bill. We've really gone through the 8 parts of the bill in a very purposeful manner. First of all, in part 1, when we deal with the preliminary aspects, we're looking at clauses 1 to 5. We set out how we bind the state, what the positions look like, and permit me to start with those sections immediately. Obviously, we have clause 1, which is the standard title, short title. Clause 2, we're proposing for this to commence by way of proclamation clause. Clause 3, we state the obvious that the act is inconsistent with the Constitution, and that is to be clear when one considers the privacy issues which would offend Section 4 of the Constitution and also the several sections of the Data Protection Act, the vast majority of which are unproclaimed but still stand on the books of Trinidad and Tobago. And then, of course, we have the Section 4 provision of the Board of Inland Revenue legislation, which is a pre-1962 law, which would also be traversed by the disclosure of information requirements. There is, of course, treatment in the right to privacy, private life, to be found again in Section 4 of the Constitution when we're treating with the power of entry, and I'll come to that separately in a moment. We then go to the interpretation section in Clause 4, and I want to point out a few important things here. We've included, as a result of the operational workout of the Statistics Act, an important clause. Define now we have gated facility or community, because the experience in the request to get returns done demonstrated as Trinidad promoted gated communities, etc., that the representatives of the statistician could not enter gated communities, had difficulty in accessing condominiums, townhouses, etc. So we have purposefully defined that concept. It's not alien to our modern laws. When you look to the provisions that we have in the property tax legislation or the valuation of property legislation, the Registration of Title to Lands Act, the Land Adjudication Act, we've in very recent times, parliamentary-wise, treated with these definitions. We have also, gone a little bit further into the treatment of microdata. Microdata gets us into the position of managing how we treat with the different subsets of data to be published. Metadata, microdata, there's a distinction between the two aspects to make sure that we get the publication issues clear, because in today's world of statistics, meta and microdata are very relevant for extrapolation and utilization. We've defined the national statistical system, and this is now the ensemble of public bodies in Trinidad and Tobago to collect and process statistics, because we are now tying in the many sources of information, because one of the mischiefs observed in the Statistics Act was that the coordinating factor of the statistician was not properly managed in the existing law, and therefore we found silos of information, not willing to share information, notwithstanding the implied obligation to do so under the Statistics Act. Of course, we've defined official statistics and public body. Public body is synonymous with the definition that we've used in the public procurement legislation. It matches up with the any body supported directly or indirectly by government funds. That's the material part. And that is synonymous with the legislation to deal with public procurement and disposal of property. Of course, we've defined statistics in similar fashion to the old law, the existing law, by reference to what statistics look like in Schedule 1 of the existing Act and of the bill. The Act does bind the state in Clause 5. Now, Part 2 is quite interesting. It's 2 sections only, clauses 6 and 7. Here's where we define the treatment of the National Statistical Institute. We are taking the advice of Sweden. We're taking the advice of best practice. We are choosing to establish a body corporate to be known as the National Statistic Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. And we define in Clause 7 the functions of the NSITT. These functions are breakout versions with slight expansion from what the current CSO does. And importantly, in subsection 2, the minister is to act on the advice of the Director General, may amend the order in Schedule 1, and it's that Schedule 1 that tells you what you statistically are collecting. Part 3 is a very important safeguard to the law. In clauses 8 to 17, we establish a board of the NSITT. This board Yes, it does have the feature of the word minister appearing. Yes, that is an executive appointment fashion for 6 persons to be appointed by the minister among following disciplines, 1 person from the THA and the director ex officio. But what we do is we go on in clause 9 to describe what the board is responsible for, and it is confined to management policies. And we draw that distinction to say that in the architectural creation of the NSITT, we treat with the director now taking the functionality of the statistician under the existing law. We make sure that the National Statistics Institute is ring-fenced away from the board. Yes, the board is populated by the cabinet, as is currently the minister's discretion under the Statistical Institute, under the Statistics Act, where there's an involvement between executive and the functionality. But very importantly, in clause 9, in defining that the board is responsible for management policies, we make sure that we limit the functionality of any executive involvement. And we cauterize that by saying that we specify what the board shall not be responsible for. So in ring-fencing the autonomy and independence of the National Statistics Institute, by creating the body corporate, we're allowing for it to be independently funded, we're allowing for it to not be subjected to the vagaries of blowing in the wind, in going from ministry to ministry as a department or not, and we ring-fence it by saying the board shall not be responsible for the functions of the NSITT in clause 7. And that means that the board shall also not provide specific directions or have access to any information at all. We also say that the minister can only give general or specific policy directives in writing. And again, that's a very commendable feature of the law as this bill sets out. We then go on in clause 10 to define the duties and functions of the Director General. We say that the Director General shall perform his functions and duties in relation to national statistics reporting independently of the control of any person or authority. And that is an important safeguard to the role and functionality of this entity. It mirrors, for instance, the Financial Intelligence Unit, which, albeit that it falls under the Ministry of Finance, is deemed to be ring-fenced and cauterized away from the executive. It mirrors some of the functionality of the interrelationship between central government and other entities in our society. We say what the Director General shall be responsible for, and we make sure that there is a careful limitation in clause 10, subclause 3, of the functionalities of the Director General and the caution to be provided in how that office holder interacts with the board and or the minister. We make sure that we allow for supplementation in clause 11 by the appointment of ad hoc advisory committees to the Director General, that he has the authority to actually perform that functionality, not an executive member. And then we go on to the manner in which the Director General shall be appointed by the board with the approval of the minister, serving a term not more than 4 years. And I want to say that this is a replication of the existing law, insofar as the statistician, as a public office holder, mirrors up the Director General. There is an executive function to be provided there in the usual form. We deal with resignation from the board members in clause 13. The removal of the Director General is carefully prescribed in clause 14. For reason of being declared a bankrupt, becoming of unsound mind, incapable of performing the duties of Director General, has neglected the duties of Director General, engaged in conduct which will bring the office into disrepute, been absent without leave for more than 3 consecutive meetings, has been convicted of an offense involving dishonesty, has been convicted of an offense under the Integrity in Public Life Act, as there is intended to be a marriage there, has been convicted of an offense punishable by imprisonment for 1 year or more under offense provisions of this law, and in breach of confidentiality contrary to the oath of secrecy as the bill provides. We then deal with some of the prescriptive elements, the meeting of the quorum in clause 15, declarations of conflicts of interest in clause 16. Again, there is harmony with the public procurement legislation that we have, and a number of other pieces of law. and then we deal with remuneration to be that by the Salaries Review Commission. That's in clause 17. Part 4 is important when we look to the staff arrangements. These are clauses 18 to 26. I'd like to point out that we have treated with the NSITT having the ability to employ its staff, clause 18. Options available to public officers, and this is very important. Option 1, and I stick a pin. In this bill, we propose the designation of the Public Services Association as the recognized entity as it currently serves the 300-odd people in the Statistics Institute, Trinidad and Tobago's existing law. We've designated that functionality because we have legislative prescription. If you look to the Housing Development Corporation Act, Chapter 3306, Section 33, subclauses 1 to 3, you'll find the precedent there. If you look to the Civil Aviation Authority, Chapter 4903, 26 capital A and B, you'll find precedent there. And we've done that, adding for a limitation on when recognition and certification can happen pursuant to the Industrial Relations Act, so that we preserve that which we have negotiated with the PSA on already. So the public servants coming back, the employees available to public officers, options in clause 19, we first of all describe permanent appointees or persons who've held temporary appointments and served at least 2 continuous years. They have one of 3 options. In the creation and migration of staffing, you can voluntarily resign from the public service, terms and conditions to be agreed with the CPO. Secondly, you can seek employment with the NSITT on terms and conditions no less favorable than that which you enjoy at present. And lastly, of course, the obvious option, you can remain in the public service provided that an office commensurate with the office held whilst working in the public service was available. We've provided in clause 20 for secondment. We've provided in clause 21 for the establishment of the pension plan within 5 years. In clause 22, we have dealt with the superannuation aspects, treating with those who die or retire prior to the establishment of the pension plan, or those who get into the pension plan before it has been created. So we manage that in clause 22. We get to clause 23. We deal with the payment of superannuation benefits by the NSITT prior to establishment. Payments of the pension plan in clause 24 also further done. This is not new. There are umpteen precedents of these particular provisions in our laws. It's in clauses 25 and 26 that we deal with the Public Services Association being deemed in the manner that I've given example for in the HDC legislation or Civil Aviation Authority legislation. And then we've also given grandfathering, if I can call it that, a right of advantage to the PSA for a period of 2 years, so that there's no recognition and certification unless the industrial court allows you that privilege pursuant to the provisions in sections 38.2 and 38.3 of the Industrial Relations Act, where you can get the leave of the court to do that application. Part 5, in clauses 27 to 29, treat with the financial provisions of the NSITT. Monies appropriated by Parliament, monies borrowed by the NSITT, and any fees, dues, or charges, that will be the money of the NSITT. Again, umpteen precedent for that in the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. We prescribe the financial year end. We have harmonized that with the financial year end of Trinidad and Tobago in clause 28. In clause 29, we make sure that we're treating with these accounts of the NSITT being public accounts, subjected to section 116 of the Constitution as is normal, the requirements for laying in Parliament, all of the general provisions that are accompanied by public accounts and scrutiny under the Auditor General's hand are replicated there. The guts of the law, and I'm sure the matters of most interest in this debate, fall under the general provisions. Part 6. General provisions, clauses 30 to 39. Let's call a spade a spade. Right of power of entry, right to demand production of information, including Board of Inland Revenue information. And I'll come to that. The other provisions replicate the clauses of the sections of the existing law. And I'd like to say this. Under the existing law, the Statistics Act, there is a power of entry without warrant. Full stop. You may be bound to produce your authorization under the existing law for entry. In any circumstance, you must do so for a dwelling house, only when you're asked to if it's not a dwelling house. But there's no warranting. And because it is pre-1962 law and therefore saved law, the existing Statistics Act is draconian. It does not comply with the Section 4 rights of the 1976 Constitution, but it is accepted by virtue of the savings clause from that. In our provision here, we of course provide for the taking of census in Clause 30. We're keeping with a formula which allows for the guarantee of the taking of census in the cycles that we're accustomed to. 10 years for households, 10 years for agricultural, industrial, and 5 years for the other mechanisms. But we also prescribe the annual return factor for that, so that we have to give advance notice of certain things that we're going to do. Of course, this is open to change by the Director General, asking for variations from the established timeframes. So you see Clause 30, National Population Housing Census. It's subject to negative resolution of Parliament. I point out that is different from the existing law. The older law, then based, you'll find a lot of the amendments to the orders or schedules or positions were to be done by affirmative resolution of the Parliament. We say that the first census should start in the year 2020 or such other time as the Director General may do by negative resolution order. We deal with the collection and publication of statistics in Clause 31. Every year, if you look at subsection 4 of Clause 31, on or before the 31st December in each year, the NSITT shall publish in at least 2 newspapers in daily circulation in Trinidad and Tobago a release calendar specifying the dates in the following year on or before which official statistics in relation to such matters as are specified shall be disseminated. Perhaps, but it is intended with correct IT, with correct management, with correct funding, to at least allow for an anticipation of the production of statistics, even though our current Minister of Finance, the member for Diego Martin Northeast, has done extremely well to make sure that our budget figures are done on CSO figures and not Ministry of Finance figures, as prevailed under Minister Hawaii in his time. Our Minister of Finance has managed to rely upon regular production of data on a functioning entity. We wanted to put into the parent law this obligation for anticipatory notice of publication. Clause 33. Notwithstanding any other written law, the NSITT shall be granted access to all records, documents, returns, and certificates, whether individual or corporate, in the control of all public bodies, including the NIB and the Board of Inland Revenue. I stick a pin there. That's no doubt going to be an issue of discussion with us all. The statistician has informed that whilst the current law allows for access to all public records, and impliedly so to the Board of Inland Revenue, the need for clarity to access the Board of Inland Revenue in circumstances beyond that described in the existing law is required in this law. So that is something that we need to talk about. When we get to the power to collect records and documents, the NSITT shall be authorized to collect any requested records, etc. Power to require persons to supply information, unless there is a prescriptive, compelling obligation for persons to give their information, and it is sanctioned so that you can apply the force of law behind it. It is pie in the sky to want to collect statistics. They must be capable of being garnered, capable of being gathered, capable of being obtained, and therefore there is a need to apply a sanction and remedy for failure to provide correct records, non-fraudulent records, the time frame for records, the particulars of records done, the veracity, etc. And quite importantly, and you'll see here, where people submit returns that are insulting, frivolous, or vexatious. For instance, a form filled out saying, none of your business, none of your business, none of your business. As actually happens, as I'm aware. Yeah. Let's get to safeguards and exemptions. We are providing in Clause 35 a very important due processing aspect. We're saying that in subclause 8, nothing contained in this act shall affect or be deemed to affect any law in relation to disclosure or non-disclosure of any secret, confidential information, evidence, document of any person required, such as to give any evidence or produce document, and we protect, by way of express reference, privileges including legal professional privilege, parliamentary privilege, and other privilege. Madam Speaker, what time am I bound to end?
2:44:25.
In full time. Much obliged. 4 minutes. So, Madam Speaker, as time is obviously in scarce supply here, I will say we have allowed for the protection of privilege. Very importantly, in the right of access, we have introduced for the first time the requirement that you must obtain the consent of persons within the hours that we now vary. We've gone from 7 to 7. We've gone from 7 to 4 to 7 to 7. And we are saying you must obtain consent, particularly for households every time. If you don't get consent, find yourself before a magistrate, obtain a warrant, have the warrant authorize who shall enter, and only in those circumstances, with due process considerations, ought you to have the right to enter. That is to be safeguarded, amplified by the fact that you have the ability to appeal any decision directly to the High Court. We've expanded that, we've simplified the language coming from the old law. You can apply it to the court, and of course the right of appeal coming directly from the inherent jurisdiction of the High Court formulation still applies in that basis. So warranting, protection, due process, we ensure that any right of entry here, and importantly, any dispute that you may have with that which is required of you, you can knock on the door of the High Court and you can say why you ought not to comply and therefore avoid the application of breach. Madam Speaker, we have treated with those appeals in clause 43, forgive me, any person being aggrieved by or through any demand or requisition of the NSITT may appeal to the High Court against a demand, requisition upon giving notice in writing within 28 days of that demand, etc. We've dealt with clauses 44 onward in the miscellaneous provisions to 49 with repeal and replace, provisions to prevail, with the exemptions of stamp duty, with the power to create regulations. I've described the many regulations which are ready for consideration of the honourable members, and we've dealt with the replication of delegated functions as has happened under the old law. So, Madam Speaker, the government's position is that this law is critical, it's important, the time is now. We've done the IT work, the consultative work, we've spoken with the unions, we've dealt with the staffing arrangements, we've dealt with the operationalization. However, we accept that this provision is such that we require unanimity of purpose. It represents a continuation of effort from last government to this and even government prior, and therefore we consider it opposite to our best interests that we refer this bill to a joint select committee for members' consideration, and we are proposing a joint select committee of 12 members, Madam Speaker. We look forward to the contributions of learned members of this House and certainly the members of the joint select committee as we march on to ensuring that Trinidad and Tobago can move in the right direction of the proper application of statistical evidence to our growth and benefit as a society. I beg to move, Madam Speaker, as the Leader of the House will then deal with the establishment of the committee at a later stage, as I understand. Correct. Much obliged.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for the debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Repeal and Replace the Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, establish a National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, and for other related matters be now read a second time. Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. For once, the Attorney General representing the government has come to the Parliament and presented a bill without provocation and without rancor, I would say. And for that, I want to, first of all, acknowledge it, and secondly, commend the Attorney General on this particular instance.
Who is that imposter?
This is an important bill, as the Attorney General mentioned. It is going to repeal the existing Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, and it is going to replace it with the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago Act when it becomes law. And the bill here also has, and 4 other related matters. A national statistical system is a very important thing in a country. Recently, I had the opportunity firsthand to see in a public space how the business of statistics can really, or the lack of it, I would say, can retard the process of development. The Public Accounts Committee was engaging NAMDEVCO, and in the process, I asked a question about the number of farmers, the quantity of land, how many were registered, etc. And it turned out that although they had identified a significant number of farmers in the country, they had no idea of the amount of land, the quantity of land that was involved, and only a small proportion of them, I think 3,000, just over 3,000 out of something like 17,000, had in fact been identified. And that raised the question of how can you really plan your agricultural strategy in terms of production and the various things you did with it if you did not have those statistics. So that is a practical example of how statistics are critical to the development process, to the decision-making process, to the policy-making process. And therefore, this is indeed a very, very important bill, because the attempt here that has been made by over several administrations, including the People's Partnership Administration, is to try to establish an independent and autonomous capability to make a national statistical system with integrity and with trust possible. And the Attorney General acknowledged that the issue of trust was important in the establishment of the institution and the institution's ability to develop and establish a system. Now, I'm also very happy that in keeping with the commitment of the Minister of Planning and Development when she made a statement before laying the bill, that this bill is in fact going to a joint select committee, because notwithstanding the importance of the bill, there are many, many issues that are very contentious in the bill. And if we are to have an institution that is national in scope and jurisdiction, generates the trust, and is able to do the work that is necessary in an efficient and effective way, and have the autonomy and the freedom and the independence to do it, which is something very beneficial as a public institution for Trinidad and Tobago, then we must do it properly. And the Joint Select Committee is the way to proceed. Now, if you look at the bill, Madam Speaker, for instance, in Clause 7D, the issue of establishing standards is mentioned. And the National Statistical Institute will comply, will establish standards, but it does not say who or how these standards will be established. If you look at the bill also, you will see that although a national statistical system is mentioned, and this bill is to establish the institute, the purpose of the institute is not identified. And I think that that is something that we need to look at. It has its functions. The functions are clearly identified. What is the ultimate purpose of this institution? And I think we need to include that in it. Another issue that might be important here is how do you represent the public interest in addition to the specialist interests that are identified for this institution? And I think that that is something that we also need to take into account. And because we're having a joint select committee, I won't belabor the points here. In the exercise of its functions, the board shall not be responsible for the function of the NSITT as specified in Section 7 and shall not provide specific directions to the Director General or employee, etc. And they may not have access to any information. I see, Madam Speaker, the potential for conflict between the person in charge of statistics, which is the Director General, who really needs to have that power and authority and autonomy, and a board that is responsible and of which he is a member and to which he must report on some things. And more than that, I think that the board, as I understand it from this bill, will provide the allocation for whatever is the plan of action for the Director General during the course of a year. So I believe that there are built-in issues for conflict there that we need to take into account. Then the other issue is the minister. The minister may give to the board such general and specific policy directives in writing with respect to the carrying out of its function. The minister may give such general policy directive in writing to the Director General as he considers necessary or expedient. Now, here is a minister giving direction to both the board and the Director General. Okay? I believe that that is not such a comfortable situation to be comfortable situation for managing an institution of any kind. And I think that that can be a cause for, I wouldn't say conflict, but I think it can create some problems. I'm not raising the issue. So far, I haven't raised it, but it is an issue of whether, in fact, the appointment should be made by the minister or cabinet on the recommendation of the minister. But that is a matter, I think, that we need to consider. The whole issue of the ministerial responsibility, the board responsibility, the Director General's responsibility. I think unless we get some precision and clarity in this, we could have tensions and conflict. And the end result is that the institution will suffer. And of course, the statistical information, which we prize so dearly, will in fact suffer as well. Now, when you read this bill carefully, you see that in addition, the Director General is responsible for all functions of the SITT as defined in Clause 7, and the board for management policies in relation to matters in Clause 9. It is not clear from the bill whether the Director General will be accountable for executing these management policies under the jurisdiction of the board and accountable to the board for these, or whether the board will operate as an executive board to carry out its mandate. And that is what I mean in terms of how these powers are organized. This is one issue that comes up. The AG may give clarity in his winding up, and we will have opportunity to explore this. But I'm just flagging some of the issues that come up immediately. The lack of clarity on this matter in the definition of responsibility and accountability for outcomes is problematic, since the board shall not provide specific directions to the director general or any employee of NSITT with respect to the function of the NSITT. So you see how convoluted this becomes, you know, and I understand the problem. The problem is that you want to give power over statistics to the director general, but you also have a board that has power to achieve the objectives of the national institution. So you have a kind of separation of powers built into a situation where the Director General is also a member of the board. And that does not take into account the specific and general directions to be given by the minister. So I think immediately you can see, Madam Speaker, how with three bosses, so to speak, you are bound to set up yourself for a problem with an institution like this. And I think we need the utmost clarity in dealing with this matter. I note the fact that the ministerial, I want to acknowledge the importance of the minister setting down instructions in writing. I am not conceding that the minister, in fact, should be the one to make these appointments. I have my real doubts about that. But I understand the significance of the minister putting down instructions in writing, because there's a public record and it brings transparency to the situation. And I want to acknowledge that is an important consideration in outlining how, in fact, the minister would function in relation to both the board and to the Director General. Now, the other issue here is the issue of the workers and how they transition into this new institution and the role of the institution. I wouldn't deal with that. Maybe one of my colleagues will deal with that when they get up to speak. But I think, again, here there can be a problem. And I think already problems are emerging. These things are very difficult when you are dealing with the transition of workers and when you are dealing with the options that people have for choosing a union when a union already exists in the domain. And again, this is something, in my view, that is problematic to manage. Now, Clause 33 is also problematic. Access to all the records, etc., from the BIR, notwithstanding any other written law. The law currently grants BIR confidentiality and power not to disclose. So the issue here is problematic. On the one hand, certain kinds of BIR data, I want to concede, are critical to doing things like the GDP. And at the same time, the issue of privacy does arise. And I want to say that this issue is a vexing issue for more than one institution. I think the AG would be aware of this. In the FATCA debate, Madam Speaker, this issue of the BIR and how it would function came up. And I think that we resolved it successfully in the JSC there. So that was not a problem there because we were able to resolve it. In the income tax amendment bill, it is also an issue. I am not sure if it has been resolved successfully there, but it remains an issue. In the matter of the Auditor General, who has to audit all the accounts of the country, certainly the public monies accounts for Trinidad and Tobago, the Auditor General also wants access to all of this because it is an issue of how can you be auditing and not having access to the information. And I think that
Member? But all members just ensure that their devices are often... Is the device still in here? Please, member for Caroni Central.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. So with the Auditor General, that is an issue that has not yet been resolved, but it raises the same big issue. How do you allow the Auditor General power for the sake of transparent management of the national accounts? And how do you protect people's privacy? And here in this Statistical Institute, in this establishment, to give them the power, you have the same issue coming. Now, I want to say immediately, if the Statistical Institute had the power and the authority to get the VAT accounts, for instance, or to get the accounts for sales in an organization and be able to accrue them, the accuracy of the information would be much more significant. So there is a case to be made for access to this information. The issue is how do you protect people's privacy in a serious way? And I know that there are elements in the bill itself which seek to do that, and there are confidentiality clauses and oaths of secrecy which have to be signed as well. I don't know if all the public bodies, maybe AG you can just indicate to me, are going to be identified in a schedule. Are they going to be? Well, I would think that you would want to identify all the public bodies in a schedule of some kind so that it is transparent and everybody knows. Everybody knows also who are accountable and who are part of the system in the public sector and who are not. And that can be amended over time if you add new institutions to it. But it would be very clear, and it would make for a lack or an avoidance of nebulousness, it seems to me, if you have it. The issue of registrar of births and deaths, I do not find that very efficient. I think the ideal thing would be for the Ministry of Health, for instance, to be able, or some institution, to be able to collate all of this, and then the CSO deals with that institution. But if you had to deal with all of these issues all of these entities one by one, I could see a problematic situation. The issue of private sector information, which is critical, Madam Speaker. I mean, to calculate the GDP of this country, unless you can have accurate private sector information, you're dead. You can't do it. And that may well have been a problem for many, many years. And I think that the issue of how you get the private sector to comply, which I know is something that is addressed in here, is something, again, that has to be carefully attended to, because you don't want to use a kind of big stick to deal with people, but at the same time, you do not want people to simply say, look, I am not providing the information that you want, when the larger picture is how to get the statistics right. And therefore, some kind of formula has to be found to do that. Now, the Bible, so to speak, on how you establish a statistical institution in a country is the UN Handbook on Statistical Organization. I think the last one is the 3rd edition or something like that. And this was used, certainly in my time, as a guide on how we were going to do this. And the model CARICOM statistics bill, I have it here as well, was also used as a guide. By the way, in that bill, the bill points more, or at least gives the option of the person who appoints the council or an institution similar to that, that person would be, depending on which state you were in CARICOM, as the president or the governor general, so that there are other models of how you do it. We did appoint a management transition team to manage the crossover from the CSO to the National Statistical Office, Statistical Institute. And I know that a lot of the good work in terms of policy framework and the issues to be attended to were identified by that committee. The Legislative Committee was established under the current Minister of Planning, and this bill, therefore, evolves out of that ministry. Now, generally, a bill derives out of a certain vision. And the minister, in her statement, and if you look at any of the statements that I made at the time, you would see that the vision was for independence and autonomy. And this is something that this minister, that's to say the Minister of Planning, the current Minister of Planning, whom the minister, the AG, ably represented today, she, in fact, that's to say the Minister of Planning, indicated that, in fact, she was committed. No, talking about the former minister, sorry. The former minister. The Minister of Planning, I meant. The Minister of Planning made a commitment to transparency, but to autonomy and to independence of the institution. Now, so if that is the vision, and I share that vision, because if you want to have a decent and serious institution that commands not just national trust but international respect, you have to have that. So what are the issues? What are the issues in doing that? How to establish a reliable, comprehensive, accurate, credible national statistical system. So that has to do with how many institutions you open, how do you ensure compliance, and how do you ensure accuracy in the institution. Now, a national statistical system is a public good. Now, it is important to say that. And that is why government is involved in it. Because nobody else will establish this as a public good. If this were a private sector initiative, and I think within our time, the AG may remember, I think that there was a private sector assertion that maybe they should establish a statistical system that could service the private sector. But the problem with something like that, Madam Speaker, is that if it were established by anybody else, it would have to be run as a commercial enterprise. And what that means is, just like education, if you don't see it as a public good, is that those who can pay can have access. But those who cannot pay cannot have access. And always in a public good, you have to be aware of the fact that it must be available equally to everybody who is a citizen or who needs to have access to this information, or this service, or this product, and so on. So, because it's a public good, government has to establish it. Government has to pay. Government has to make sure that it runs as a public good. Because you cannot have an information gap between those who can afford and those who cannot afford. So this is one issue. The question that derives from that is, what kind of institution do you need to make that possible? If the national institution is a public good. Now, it has to be structured and organized to function well, first of all. But the second issue is, what must be its character? What must its character be? And that is where the issue of independence and autonomy become important. How do you assure integrity of the national statistical system? And I am not saying that there has been lack of integrity so far. There have been problems, but I don't think that there has been lack of integrity in the system. And how do you secure statistical integrity of the National Statistical Institute? I think those are two critical questions. What are the fundamental principles when you are dealing with official statistics? What code of conduct do you need to have to make that possible? How do you ensure that it has the wherewithal to stand up to scrutiny of the international system? What are the problems, therefore, that need to be solved? And we need to be aware of that. I mentioned one of them, which is how to compel stakeholders who have the information to provide it. And the bill does provide for public stakeholders. It identifies private stakeholders as well. And I am not sure if everything exists there to get the kind of compliance we need. So I think this remains an issue. The issue of accuracy, comprehensiveness, timeliness, relevance, those things become critical because that cannot be the responsibility of a minister. That has to be the responsibility of the institution. And that institution has to function like clockwork to meet its mandate. Part of the problem with the CSO so far has been this nebulousness of its functioning, which is that it has moved from the Prime Minister's office to the Ministry of Planning. I think it was somewhere besides in the Ministry of Finance before. And that has been part of the problem. Now, it is well located in the Ministry of Planning because of what the Ministry of Planning does. But it does need not just permanence, but it needs stature. And that stature comes with independence and with autonomy, and therefore, after that, respect on its own. And therefore, it is critical that we do what is required to achieve that. I want to read something from the current director of the CSO, because he made a statement the other day which was very, very interesting. I think it was in 2017. He said, the vision for the structured CSO would be that it would exist, and I quote from him now, outside of the confines of central government, and therefore obtain the necessary independence and autonomy needed to effectively coordinate and manage the national statistical system. Now, I quite frankly think that's a pretty brave thing for a current director of statistics to say. But he is on solid ground in saying that. The question would be, how do you achieve that? And I raise that which is, how do you achieve that in the context in which, as I said before, it is a public good and the government has to make it possible and pay for it in order to create a system of equality in terms of access to statistics. So I won't elaborate and fight this issue. I raise it for the consideration of the Attorney General. It will obviously have to be an issue that we engage in the Joint Select Committee. But the question is, how do you do that? How do you, if this is the big issue, Yes.
Your original 30 minutes are now spent. You're entitled to 15 minutes to continue and complete your.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So, what are the issues that we are flagging here that are likely to be controversial and worthy of discussion? The question of access to the BIR and VAT documents on sales, profit, VAT payments, etc., and the protection of privacy. I think that would be a concern of how we do it. The second thing, what is the role of the minister in the issue, and what is the role of government generally? Now, recently I had occasion to be at the University of the West Indies in a session in which the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West was also there. And after the session, a young student, master's degree, just finished, came up and spoke to me, and he said something that triggered something in my own head. Because the question he asked me, he said, you know, Dr. Tewarie, one of the issues in this particular instance, we were discussing the issue of sandals, is what is the role of government in a situation such as this? And we talked a little bit. I wouldn't disclose the nature of the conversation, but as I was driving out, I was thinking about it, and I realized that he had triggered something in my mind that is very important. You know, often we talk about what is the role of the private sector, what is the role of the state, what is the role of government. But what this young man triggered in my head is this. It is not so much what is the role of government over all things, or the role of the private sector in all things. It is what is the role of government in each situation. And I think we have to be very sophisticated about it, because the dominant role of government might be necessary for some things. All right? A quasi-governmental presence may be necessary for some things. Minimal government presence may be necessary in other instances. And there are some instances in which government should be nowhere around at all. And I want to raise this issue of what is the appropriate governmental presence that you want in an institution such as the National Statistical Institute. And we could discuss that, because I think that that is something that needs to be discussed. If we understand the principle, and I thank the young man for raising the issue, that the role of government can differ from instance to instance, depending on what the particular context demands and what are the results or the consequences or the outputs that you are looking for. The other issue, I raised the issue of the minister, the board, and the director in this. I think that this is a blueprint for conflict. I think the AG probably sees it already. And I think it's almost self-evident that you're going to have some problems there. The question is, how do we resolve it? Then together with that is the question of appointments. The other issue, because the power of appointments becomes an issue because of that. The other and final thing I want to raise in relation to those kinds of issues is what is the role of the stakeholders in the system. So this bill is written in such a way that you have the major players to establish the institution and to connect the system. But a critical part of this, and the only value of a national statistical system, is for the users. All right? And there is the demand side from the users, but there's also the supply side of the information. So the stakeholders are critical and the users are critical. And therefore, the bill needs to take into account those two critical elements. So the stakeholder element, the consumer element, if you want to call it that, as to say the user element, we also have to take those things into account. And I said I wouldn't use all of my time of the 15 minutes, but I do want to deal with the issue of financial considerations. Because the CSO at the present time usually wants about $100 million to operate. It usually gets about 40, and this has been across governments, okay? So the problem would be if you have a national statistical system, would effective funding be guaranteed? Because that is an element of its autonomy and independence. You know, we have a situation in order to create the autonomy and independence for the House of Assembly, we decided and determined a formula. There are many questions and controversies about the formula, and it will continue for some time. It may come up again with the bill that is due in Parliament. But the principle has been established. And a key, we also have the situation of the judiciary, and that has been a matter. How do you ensure judicial independence if they do not have control over the appropriations from the public purse? And therefore, this issue also comes up in this National Statistical Institute, Madam Speaker. And I feel that that is something that we must address to ensure that, as in fact some people claim has happened, that this is not an issue in either the strengthening or the diminishing of the power of the institution that has to manage the national statistics for Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, there are many more things that I could say, but I will not. I am very glad that we are going to the Joint Select Committee. It will give everybody a chance to make an equal contribution, I hope. And at the end of the day, if we came up with a consensus document, I think we could have something worthy of the nation and worthy of the 21st century in which we live, and something that we could be proud of when we think about other institutions of similar kinds in other countries that really have done it well. And with that said, I want to thank you for the opportunity to say a few words today and to make my contribution. Thank you very much.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is necessary to put some factual information on the record.
Correct.
So that persons will understand the current situation with respect to statistics, what this government has done in terms of improving the collection and publishing of accurate statistics, and what we inherited, Madam Speaker. And I go straight to the, Madam Speaker, I don't know what's wrong with members opposite. Is truth so bad that it bothers you? So, Madam Speaker, if you look at the 2014 Article 4 consultation with the International Monetary Fund, between the International Monetary Fund and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and let me repeat the year, the 2014 Article 4 consultation between the IMF and Trinidad and Tobago, the following statement was made by the IMF in 2014. And Madam Speaker, the Article 4 report is usually published around September, October. So this would have been in the third or fourth quarter of 2014, towards the end. And this is what the IMF had to say about the country's ability to gather and publish accurate statistical data. Data shortcomings have reached critical mass and now severely constrain staff's ability to conduct economic surveillance. The Central Statistical Office temporarily ceased operations in mid-2013, and I would like honorable members to understand what year we're talking about, mid-2013. And this is not the PNM saying this, this is the IMF saying this, and now operates under extreme resource constraints, leading to very long lags for GDP, trade, and labor data. Official trade data are available up to February 2012, while the GDP data for 2012 is still only provisional. That was in the end of 2014. The IMF was indicating that our GDP data and our trade data was more than 2 years out of date. There are significant gaps in tourism statistics, while expenditure side and quarterly GDP estimates that are flawed due to methodological weaknesses. This is what was happening towards the end of 2014. There has been little concrete progress implementing reforms, and they were speaking about the previous government. CSO staff are still in temporary locations, and permanent quarters are unlikely in the next 12 to 18 months. So this was the IMF speaking towards the end of 2014 and saying that permanent accommodation for the CSO was not likely before the end of 2015. The CSO's self-proclaimed goal to bring a wide range of statistics rapidly up to date once they move into new quarters is laudable, but severe resource shortcomings cast serious doubt on its achievability. The 2014 IMF Article 4 consultation report also noted the CSO currently has 350 staff, and due to inadequate office accommodation, some staff work from home, rotate office spaces, or do not work at all. Additional trade data recently became available from March 2012 to October 2013. However, the CSO has cautioned the data are not yet reliable. And one final noteworthy comment on the CSO from the 2014 Article 4 IMF report summarizes the conditions which prevailed at that time, towards the end of 2014. Critically, the lack of reliable and timely data is an overarching problem that hampers public and private decision making. Since the last Article 4 discussions, this would have been Article 4 discussions in 2013 with the then government, there has been little concrete in implementing lasting reforms to remedy data shortcomings. The CSO still has no permanent quarters. After its building was condemned last year, it remains starved of resources, leading statistics production to seriously lag in critical areas. Data shortcomings now severely constrain staff's ability to conduct surveillance. Moreover, aside from the plan to alleviate resource shortages on a temporary basis, there are no concrete signs of implementing an action plan to resolve the problems at the statistical agency. And there is therefore a critical and urgent need to provide the CSO the resources needed to fulfill its mission. That was the CSO under the member for Caroni Central, who seems to have walked away. Now let me talk about the CSO under the present PNM government, under the stewardship of the current Minister of Planning and Development, the Member of Parliament for Aruka Maloney. This is now what the IMF had to say in 2017. This would be in the Article 4 2017 consultation. This would be just about 15 months after the PNM took office. The authorities are committing to improving data provision through the establishment of an independent National Statistical Institute, which will replace the CSO. In the meantime, and this is PNM performance, Madam Speaker, this is the performance of the Honourable Member for Aruka Maloney. The CSO has obtained new offices, taken on additional provisional staff to reduce the backlog of uncompleted surveys, increased staffing with the assistance from the central bank, and secured technical assistance from a number of international partners. This is not my words, Madam Speaker. These are the words of the International Monetary Fund in its Article 4 consultation report of 2017. The IMF went on to say, the CSO has made noticeable improvements in the timeliness of data provision since 2015. The GDP estimates have been improved and rebased from 2000 to 2012. Revised real and nominal production side GDP estimates have been compiled for 2012 to 2015, with preliminary estimates produced for 2016. The last expenditure side GDP data is for 2008. The CSO expects to compile updated GDP estimates, expenditure side GDP estimates during 2018, as well as releasing quarterly production side GDP estimates subject to availability of source data and resources to ensure appropriate staffing. Since the end of 2014, the CSO, this is after the end of 2014, under this government, the CSO has reduced lags in publication of its quarterly labor force bulletin to about 2 quarters from 1 year where it was previously. Madam Speaker, I don't know why someone is shouting at me from over there. I don't know why, Madam Speaker. And since I heard the shout, let me speak to you again, Madam Speaker. And just for your information, Madam Speaker, since the Honourable Member for Caroni Central believes this was done under him, let me say what the IMF had to say in 2014 under him. Data shortcomings have reached critical mass, now severely constrain staff's ability to conduct economic surveillance. There has been little concrete progress in implementing reforms. Some staff work from home or do not work at all. And under the PNM government, Madam Speaker, which is not under the member for Caroni Central, in 2017, the IMF said this: the CSO has made noticeable improvements in the timeliness of data provision since 2015. And let me make those years clear. We came into office in 2015. So the IMF is saying the CSO, under the stewardship of the Minister of Planning, our Minister of Planning, has made noticeable improvements in the timeliness of data since 2015. GDP estimates have improved, rebased from 2000 to 2012, and so on and so on. And the timeliness of data on labor and population has improved from being just 2 quarters behind from where it was 1 year behind, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I hear honourable members opposite saying it's not true. Well, tell the IMF they lie now. Tell the IMF they lie. So, Madam Speaker, let's move on now. So, I'm sorry, Madam Speaker.
All right, so you just withdraw that word. And, yeah, okay, remember we have a certain rule in here.
Pardon?
Remember we operate in a certain
Oh,
way here.
certainly, Madam Speaker. I would ask honourable members opposite to go and tell the IMF that what they put in their 2014 report about the horrible mess that the CSO was in under the previous government, and what they put in the 2017 report about the vast improvements made by this government under the Honourable Leader of Government Business are incorrect and false. Go and tell them that. Go and tell them that. Now, let's move on, Madam Speaker. Let's move on. In 2016, this will be approximately 1 year after the PNM came into office, there was a problem at the CSO that had been discovered by the Minister of Planning. And I read from a Guardian newspaper story, Thursday, October 13, 2016. And this newspaper story says that 4 CSO officers suspended for fixing figures. Police and Director of Public Prosecutions have been asked to examine 4 CSO staffers. Both agencies have been notified about the 4 CSO offers who had allegedly been falsifying labor force data. Planning Minister Camille Robinson-Regis has said. Speaking during the 2017 budget debate, Robinson-Regis said on entering office, government had some issues with CSO staff. We found internal systems indicated that over a period of time, some CSO officers had been falsifying data related to the continuous sample survey of the population, labor force data in particular, and robust quality checks revealed data was incorrect over a period of time. The 4 officers have been suspended and an internal investigation is taking place. The DPP has been advised and the police asked to investigate. Since the PNM came into office, this is the Minister of Planning speaking in the 2017 budget debate, the CSO has moved assiduously to get its standards back up to a certain level. So now it's the normal information that the CSO gives out. It seems that there may have been some underhandedness over the last 5 years, and there's a suggestion there may have been some corrupt practices. We've established an internal investigation. So, Madam Speaker, under the previous administration, the CSO was deemed by the IMF to be a total mess. Under this administration, the CSO has shown noticeable improvement, Madam Speaker. I think it's necessary now also for me to explain the difference between the collection of data and the publication of statistics by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago and the Central Statistical Office. Because when this institute is created, and I am assuming that members opposite would not want to retard the creation of an quasi-independent or independent statistical institute. I would hope that members opposite would not want to oppose the creation of an independent statistical institute. Yes, Madam Speaker, I would hope that you would not want to oppose it. This is how the central bank does its analysis, Madam Speaker, distinct and apart from the Central Statistical Office. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago computes a quarterly index of real economic activity. Just forget them, Attorney General, just ignore them. A base-weighted quantity index with a base year of 2010. That is the first difference, Madam Speaker, between the data collected by the Central Statistical Office unpublished and the data collected and published by the Central Bank. In 2017, Madam Speaker, under this administration, under this government, Madam Speaker, because we realized that under the previous administration, the Central Statistical Office was producing data that was at best unreliable. We went to the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, CARTAC. CARTAC is a regional, Madam Speaker, they're shouting at me, Madam Speaker, please.
Honorable members, I think we were doing so very well today. And therefore, I expect we will continue in that vein. Minister of Finance, I'm sure all the crosstalk will stop on both sides. And please address the chair. Continue. And member for Caroni Central, what I'll say is, even if in your estimation it is right, even if in the view you expect is correct, what I'll say is all is not lost. Minister of Finance.
Speaker. It's amazing how they shout at me across the floor and then say they weren't saying anything. Oh dear. Living in unreality. Madam Speaker, in 2017, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, this PNM government, accessed assistance from the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, or CARTAC. CARTAC is an expert center which has been established by the International Monetary Fund to provide technical assistance to governments in the Caribbean region. There are a number of these technical assistance centers all over the world. There are centers in Asia, in Europe, and so on. And our center for technical assistance from the IMF is the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, or CARTAC. In response to a request from the Central Statistical Office of Trinidad and Tobago, the sector statistics advisor at the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, CARTAC, visited Port of Spain during the period May the 1st to May the 12th, 2017, under this government, to provide technical assistance on rebasing the GDP estimates and improving the national accounts methodology. GDP by economic activity estimates are based on outdated 2000 benchmarks, and reliable quarterly GDP estimates are not available. The RSA, the Regional Sector Statistics Advisor, RSA, reviewed the available source data and worked with the National Accounts Division Manager, this is in Trinidad and Tobago, and compilers on developing the compilation worksheets to produce rebased annual GDP estimates for 2012 onwards and new quarterly GDP estimates at current and constant 2012 prices. The industry classification is being updated at the same time, moving from the International Standard Industrial Classification of all economic activities, ISIC, revision 3, to ISIC, revision 4. Now, what came out of this, Madam Speaker, is the vast improvement in reliability, accuracy, and timeliness that is now evident and manifests itself in the Central Statistical Office under this PNM administration. It's a direct result of the visit by CARTAC to Trinidad and Tobago in May 2017, which is then after the CSO did its work, when the Article 4 consultation took place. You saw the remarks from the IMF in its Article 4 consultation report of 2017, where they indicated, Madam Speaker, the grumbling is really ridiculous, where the IMF in 2017 said the CSO has made noticeable improvements in the timeliness of data provision since 2015.
For Caroni Central, you would ask, if you wish, you may ask your friend to give way.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know what the problem is. I don't know what the problem is. The statement that I am reading from is that it is clear in English. Since 2015, the CSO has made noticeable improvements in the timeliness of data provision. And therefore, since 2015 has to be after 2015. That is an obvious conclusion in the English language. The first date since 2015 is the 1st of January 2016. That's axiomatic, as my colleague from St. Joseph has said. So the first day since 2015 is January 2016. And the IMF was saying since 2015, there have been noticeable improvements in data collection and accuracy and timeliness from the Central Statistical Office, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I don't know if you heard that. He said,
Member for Caroni Central. Member for Caroni Central, I'm sure you didn't really mean that to be heard, so if you could withdraw it. And member for Naparima, thank you very much. Okay, so and member for Caroni Central, let's keep in the spirit that you yourself pointed out that prevailed today. So I'll just kindly ask you, just withdraw the statement and let's continue, please.
I find it hard to do it, but I will withdraw it, Madam.
And I do commend you going against what you think was your natural gain. Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. I find it disgusting, though. So, yes, Madam.
Minister of Finance, I think we've reached a certain plateau, and I'm going to ask you to assist me for us to remain there. Okay? Thank you. Please continue.
Speaker. So, the reason why this National Statistical Institute is so important is twofold. One, we really need to get everybody involved in terms of the private sector, the university, the business sector, and the government agencies involved in gathering of statistical information and publishing of statistical data. This institute is cutting-edge systems, Madam Speaker. Let me Also, let me also indicate what has happened in the CSO and the way the CSO gathers information, Madam Speaker. Arriving out of the visit from Qatar, there is now a questionnaire that the CSO would send to a particular business establishment, and the CSO will ask the business establishment to indicate the number of employees, the type of business, the total payments to all employees in terms of wages and salaries, contribution to pension plans, cost of housing, medical welfare facilities, directors' fees, total cost of raw materials purchased for the period, cost of goods purchased for resale in the same condition as purchased, containers, wrapping and packaging material, stationery and supplies, tools, cost of fuel and electricity, fuel for motor vehicles, natural gas and electricity, current expenses, transportation costs, utility costs, rental lease of machinery, equipment, vehicles, rental lease of building and lands, interest on bank charges, insurance, fire, machinery, vehicles, advertising and sales promotion, business and professional services, accounting, audit fees, computer services, legal expenses, security, etc., management fees, payment to commission agents, maintenance and repairs, payments to other establishments, repairs of vehicles, equipment, payments for construction materials, payments to government, indirect taxes, taxes on production, license fees, excise tax, customs duty paid on imports, water and sewage rates paid, income tax, gross business levy, withholding tax, green fund levy, travel and entertainment, scholarships and training, donations and charities, loss on foreign exchange transactions, loss on disposal of fixed assets, value of goods produced, assembled by the establishment, sold during the review period, value of services provided by the establishment during the period, total receipts from sale of goods purchased and resold in the same condition, value for services on contract work, rental or lease of machinery and equipment. I'm reading these out to show how detailed the CSO is in gathering data to allow the CSO to develop estimates of domestic production and GDP in particular. This is all of the information they gather by questionnaire. Rental lease of lands for agriculture, forestry and mining, rental lease of office space, revenue from agency operations, subsidies, interest received, dividends received, patents, copyrights, management and consultant fees, gain on foreign exchange transaction, and so on, raw materials, supplies and components, goods purchased for resale, work in progress, finished goods of its own production, construction, building construction, all other construction, roads, bridges, etc., land improvements, plant, machinery, transport equipment, vehicles and other equipment, furniture and office equipment, information technology, hardware, software, acquisition of used assets, non-current assets, including land and buildings, leasehold improvement. Madam Speaker, why is the member for Shogona Seas mumbling at me? I'll seek your protection, Madam Speaker.
I think he's conceded. You continue.
Madam Speaker, as soon as you got down, he started to talk again. Current assets, cash in hand, trade receivables, inventories, taxation recoverable, investments, equity, issued share capital, capital reserves, loan borrowings, bank overdraft, taxation payable, provision for taxation, and so on, Madam Speaker. And this is the type of detailed information that the Central Statistical Office gathers from thousands of business establishments in Trinidad and Tobago in order to produce its estimates of domestic production. The central bank, on the other hand, uses a very simple process, Madam Speaker. They compute a quarterly index of real economic activity. And they use a different base year, 2010. So while the CSO is using a base year of 2012 based on technical advice from CARTAC and detailed expert advice, the central bank is using a base year of 2010. And their index is disaggregated into a number of sectors, but it's a fraction of the sectors and information that the CSO gathers. The central bank would gather information on energy, construction, utilities, finance, transport, manufacturing, agriculture, hotels and guest services, and so on. It's just one page of data, Madam Speaker, whereas the questionnaire that upset the member for Chaguanas so much is numerous pages and has, I would say, at least 100 items of data that are collected, Madam Speaker. And for this reason, what is in the Statistics Act, the Statistics Act states clearly and unambiguously that the official collector of statistics on a number of matters, Madam Speaker, you have a significant number of issues that the CSO is empowered by law to collect data on a series of items, Madam Speaker. I could read them out for you. Population and housing, immigration and emigration, internal and external trade, primary and secondary production, agriculture, including dairying, horticulture, pastoral and allied industries. Madam Speaker, this torrent of...
Okay. But you know, Minister of Finance, you have a way of creating excitement. So maybe it's that. But I'd ask all members to observe Standing Order 53. Minister of Finance, please try and direct your contribution this way and don't allow yourself to be disturbed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The point is that, and I'm going to come to this point in a short while, to provide evidence of the way certain persons in this society manipulate data, use sources of data that they know are inaccurate and unlawful, and quote statistics and pull numbers out of a hat, Madam Speaker. So the Statistics Office is, and let me repeat, is the only lawful body authorized to publish data on population and housing, immigration and emigration, internal and external trade, primary and secondary production, GDP, agriculture, forestry and fishing, factories, mines and productive industries, because we heard reference to something called extractive industries. They are not part of the Statistics Act, Madam Speaker. Salaries, wages, bonuses, income, earnings, profit and interest, social, education, labor and industrial matters.
Minister of Finance?
Yes, Madam
Your
Speaker.
original 30 minutes are now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up your presentation. Please continue.
Much, Madam Speaker. Industrial disturbances and disputes, banking, insurance and finance generally, commercial and professional undertakings, distributive trades, health, transport and communication, wholesale and retail prices of commodities, injuries, accidents and compensation, stocks of manufactured and unmanufactured goods, sweepstakes and lotteries, land tenure, local government, work in progress, debts outstanding, fixed capital assets and plant, Madam Speaker. So those are the areas of responsibility of the Central Statistical Office. But let me now go to a newspaper article, Madam Speaker, which would illustrate what I am speaking about. The director of the CSO, the current director of the Central Statistical Office, wrote a letter which was published in the Newsday of the 25th of December 2018 under his own hand. And the current director of the Central Statistical Office had this to say. The following aims to correct some misconceptions in the media recently, and specifically an editorial dated December 15 regarding the Central Statistical Office's statistics. Recently, there seems to be some measure of confusion with regard to the income data produced and disseminated by the CSO. Be quiet. Principle 4 of the United Nations Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics states, statistical agencies are entitled to comment on erroneous interpretation and misuse of statistics. So this was the head of the CSO utilizing Principle 4 of the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics to say that he is entitled to comment on erroneous interpretation and misuse of statistics. So using that authority, he commented. And he went on to say, the recent conjecture that 75% of people in Trinidad and Tobago earn less than $6,000 does not originate from the Central Statistical Office. And consequently, it is not official statistics and may not be quoted as such. But we had the member for Tabaquit getting up in this parliament and saying 75% of persons in this country earn less than 6,000 and intimating that this came from some official source. But you have the director of the statistics division indicating clearly that didn't come from them. And the CSO is the only official source of data in this country. And he went on to say, according to the Central Statistical Office Continuous Sample Survey of Population, and I gave you an example of how the CSO gathered this data. That's why I read out the questionnaire, Madam Speaker. And one of the items, or several of the items in the questionnaire, related to employment and wages paid by business establishments in this country. So the CSO is able to say, because it gathers these questionnaires all the time on a continuous basis, that according to its data, 41.4% of people with jobs earned an income of $5,999 or less. Not 75% as put into the system by the honourable member for Tabaquit. And this is a letter written by the director of the CSO, Madam Speaker, and published in the newspapers. So I go back to the central bank, Madam Speaker. I go back to the central bank. And it is very important that we in this country, if we are to be a serious country, and we are not to be denounced by international observers as having inadequacies, inaccuracies, flaws and faults in our official statistics, one of which is GDP. When this country goes before the rating agencies such as Moody's or Standard & Poor's, Madam Speaker, the most important statistics are national production, gross domestic production, and so on, Madam Speaker, debt to GDP ratio and so on. These are the most important statistics that the international rating agencies look at. And therefore, it is very important that we in this country have credibility with our data. I'm sorry to say that in the 2014 period, there certainly was no credibility with respect to the data published in Trinidad and Tobago. And going now to the central bank, there's a tendency in this country by persons who know better, who know very well that the central bank, which it actually stated in an advertisement, Madam Speaker, the central bank published this advertisement, Madam Speaker, and they said in this advertisement, the CSO is the official source of GDP data in Trinidad and Tobago. And as such, this is the traditional data source used by the Ministry of Finance over the years for the national budget documents, including the review of the economy and the budget statement, Madam Speaker. This ad that was published by the central bank about a year ago was in direct response to people misusing information published by the central bank. The methodology that the central bank uses is totally different. They do not look at value added. They do not have an exhaustive questionnaire that they send out to business establishments. They do not have a vast array of sources of data. They use very simple data, such as sales of new cars, sales of cement, very simple data in a small area of the system, Madam Speaker. And the central bank then looks at that data and draws its conclusions in terms of what they call economic activity. It has absolutely nothing to do with GDP. It has nothing to do with growth or contraction in the economy. The central bank simply does its own compilations for its own purposes in terms of looking at credit in the banking sector, whether the repo rate should be maintained at the current 5%, reduced or increased, in terms of whether they should stimulate loans or whether they should suppress consumer spending and so on. This is what the central bank does. The central bank's job is to manage the financial sector, to manage inflation if they can, to manage consumer spending, to manage borrowing, to manage credit in the financial system and so on. So it gathers data for that purpose. But there are persons who know better, who like to, when they don't like what they see coming out of the Central Statistical Office, they would go and quote other sources. As I just indicated, I gave a particular example of statistics being pulled out of a hat. And there are persons who just like to quote statistics from out of a hat and take them from unofficial sources and try to transplant them into the official production of data. I am very hopeful, therefore, Madam Speaker, that when this Statistical Institute is established, that we would get I will have to say for the first time, data that everybody in this country can rely upon. Only persons who are up to mischief would question the data that will come out of the new Statistical Institute. In terms of this, those are matters, Madam Speaker, I will respond to the cross the floor, even though I shouldn't. Those are matters that will be dealt with, matters of drafting, that will be dealt with in the Joint Select Committee by the Attorney General and his team, and by the Minister of Planning and her team, and others who will contribute in the Joint Select Committee. Those are not matters for me to quibble about here today. That will be dealt with in the Joint Select Committee. What is important, Madam Speaker, is that the Statistical Institute, as I said, is a cutting-edge system. It is the new Statistical Institute.
Were they offending the vice, please leave the chamber and can return when they get it under control, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just reading from if I read from the CARICOM booklet on regional statistics and commentary on that, several complaints by users and other stakeholders of official statistics within the region about the type and quality of data actually emanate from weaknesses in the national statistical system. And to the extent that these weaknesses remain unrecognized and their warning signs disregarded, then the official statistics needed for bringing sustainable development into fruition, and none of us could have any argument with that, will remain suboptimal despite the numerous and continuing improvements, Madam Speaker. The CSO, I'm advised, reached out to the Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century, Paris 21, to seek assistance in the development of a national strategic development plan for statistics. The organization believes that this assistance will help to improve productivity and the delivery of statistics in Trinidad and Tobago. And this will build on the technical support and technical advice received from CARTAC, the IMF Regional Resource Center, Madam Speaker. Another potent contemporary factor that has influenced the strategies and operations of national statistical offices in the Caribbean is the IMF's General Data Dissemination System. The General Data Dissemination System is a structured process through which IMF member countries commit voluntarily to improving the quality of data produced and disseminated by their statistical systems over the long run to meet the needs of macroeconomic analysis, Madam Speaker. The whole point of it, the invitation to CARTAC and the provision of technical assistance from CARTAC to the CSO, which is already bearing fruit and showing noticeable improvement, as the IMF has indicated, is part of a pathway that the Minister of Planning, a very robust and very professional pathway towards reliable, accurate, and timely dissemination of statistical data. This is a pathway that the CSO has been put on by the Honorable Minister of Planning and this government, Madam Speaker. I am certain that this new Statistical Institute will erase the misconceptions that people in this country have with respect to where data is gathered from, how it is gathered, how accurate it is, how truthful it is, how reliable it is, and will provide some level of comfort to policymakers as they go forward in planning the development of this country, Trinidad and Tobago, and develop of the country as a whole. I completely endorse this bill. As I said, matters of drafting will be sorted out in the GSC by the Attorney General and the Minister of Planning. I beg to move, Madam Speaker.
Leader of the House.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 53, I beg to move that the debate on the National Statistical Institute Bill 2018 be adjourned to later in the proceedings.
Honorable members, the question is that the debate on the National Statistical Institute Bill 2018 be adjourned to later in the proceedings. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm authorized by the Cabinet to make this statement about the implementation of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. In view of a number of misleading, mischievous, and patently false statements made in the public domain by uninformed commentators, it is necessary to clear the air on the status of the work in progress to allow for the implementation of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, Act number 1 of 2015. Firstly, Madam Speaker, I wish to reiterate the following statement that I made in this House during the 2019 budget speech, and I quote, "The procurement regulator has been actively building capacity within the Office of Procurement Regulation. I am advised that staffing and training is in progress, and barring unforeseen circumstances, the new procurement regime utilizing best practice could be in place in the first quarter of calendar 2019. Madam Speaker, the end of the first quarter of 2019 is March the 31st, 2019, and today is only February the 1st, 2019. There are therefore 2 months to go before the end of the first quarter of the calendar year. However, notwithstanding this clear and unambiguous statement in the budget speech and the factual situation, certain spokesmen continue to attempt to mislead the population into believing the government is not doing its work and seeking to avoid the implementation of the Public Procurement Act. This is, in our view, Madam Speaker, all part of a campaign of fake news designed to create a false impression that this government is not interested in transparency or accountability. Allow me, therefore, Madam Speaker, to place the true facts on the public record for yet another time. The Act at Section 10 requires the President of the Republic to appoint the Procurement Board and Procurement Regulator in his or her own discretion, using a process developed by the Office of the President. These appointments were made by His Excellency Anthony Carmona, FC, TC, on January the 12th, 2018. Any delay before that date, Madam Speaker, cannot be reasonably ascribed to the government. After that, the regulator and his board set about securing accommodation and systems for the Office of Public Procurement, engaging staff, and drafting the draft procurement regulations that are required to give effect to the Act. In this context, I have confirmed that the Ministry of Finance has made available all necessary financial, technical, and administrative support to the Office of Public Procurement in a timely manner as requested by them, and I wish to compliment the public servants in the Ministry of Finance for their commitment and diligence in this respect. Without these regulations, Madam Speaker, the new public procurement system cannot be implemented. And under Section 63 of the Act, the regulations are made by the Minister of Finance on the recommendation of the Office of Public Procurement. Draft regulations were received at my office on November the 30th, 2 months ago. Again, any delay prior to that date cannot be reasonably ascribed to the government. The Treasury Solicitor's Office of the Ministry of Finance has already reviewed the draft regulations And in an abundance of caution and for good order, the ministry has also sent the draft regulations to external senior counsel for their review and comments in order to ensure that the regulations are intra vires the Act. Further, Madam Speaker, in a meeting held at my office on January 15, 2019, with the procurement regulator, the regulator confirmed that his office had already engaged 75% of the staff required to properly implement the Act, and he was reasonably confident that by the end of March 2019, he would have up to 90% of the required staff. I can also report that I am advised that government departments and ministries, state enterprises and statutory authorities have also been putting their house in order and preparing for the implementation of the Act by the end of March 2019. Any statement to the contrary, Madam Speaker, is therefore mischievous and false. The only thing that could possibly affect the timeline and schedule for implementation of the Act is if the advice from senior counsel, which we expect to get shortly, indicates that some aspect of the draft regulations requires amendment or clarification. I trust this puts to rest the mischief that is being propagated in the public domain about this matter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 24.4, I wish to ask the Honourable Minister the following question. Having reviewed the Act and the regulations, to what extent that the procurement regulator look retroactively at any contract entered into by the government?
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, that has nothing to do with the implementation of the Public Procurement Act.
Second reading.
Honourable members, the debate on the National Statistical Institute Bill 2018 shall now resume. Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to be able to contribute to the bill currently before the House. Madam Speaker, while listening to the presentation of the Minister of Finance, member for Diego Martin Northeast, something instantly came to my mind that the Leader of the Opposition usually shares with her members, and that is, never believe this government. They are one that engages in statistical conmanship. Madam Speaker, I was very happy that the Honourable Minister of Finance spoke about the 2014 Article 4 consultation report. You see, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister made mention of what was contained in that Article 4 report. But the Honourable Minister cherry-picked his way through in that he did not say to this House how we arrived at that position. You see, Madam Speaker, for years, in typical government mode, there was review and consideration, but no work. So the systematic problems at the CSO continued. So much so, Madam Speaker, that when we came into office in 2010, they had ran the CSO into the ground. Mr. Deputy, Madam Speaker, I want to refer to an article by Richard Lord, Wednesday, May 16, 2012. And the headline read, Political Interference at CSO by Last Government. Madam Speaker, the last government that this article referred to was a People's National Movement government, of which the member for Diego Martin Northeast played a very significant feature in. Madam Speaker, if you would allow me to quote, the article said, there was always political interference in the CSO by the last PNM administration. Minister of Planning, Bhoendradatt Tewarie, said there were also attempts to prevent the enterprise from running as the business that it was. He then gave assurances to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to clean up the CSO, to make sure that data has integrity in this country, and to ensure that information makes sense. Tewarie said the opposition was trying to run the affairs of the government from the Senate benches. So, Madam Speaker, while they were there, they were unable to do the work. It was talk, talk, talk. But let us fast track to 2014 with respect to the article mentioned by the member for Diego Martin Northeast. You see, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister spoke about juggling statistics, and he spoke about persons who pull statistics out of a hat from different quarters of the society. You know, Madam Speaker, I want to remind this Honourable Minister that it was this very Honourable Minister and this very government, just recently as of last year, who never explained to the population why two different sets of statistics and data was sent to the IMF with respect to the hydrocarbon sector of Trinidad and Tobago. So when the Honourable Minister wants to speak about pulling numbers and statistics out of a hat, I hope that members opposite can give an explanation to the people of Trinidad and Tobago as to why the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Energy were totally separate from each other in terms of providing accurate statistics to the IMF. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister, again, in keeping with the 2014 Article 4 consultation report, cherry-picked. You see, Madam Speaker, the IMF report, January 28, 2015, had this to say. There has been progress on the structural reform front. Data provision by the CSO has materially improved. Madam Speaker, I listened to the argument put forward by the member for Diego Martin Northeast, and he said, well, in 2016, in the 2016 explanation, they would have dealt with the 2015 numbers. But I want to say to the Honourable Minister, Madam Speaker, that regardless to whether it was said in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, the 2016 report would have reflected the work that was done in 2015. You see, Madam Speaker, it was the administration of Kamla Prasad Bisesa and Minister Bo Tewarie for Caroni Central, not Caroni Central then, but as Minister of Planning and Development, who would have done the work on the tail end of 2014, go into January 2015, February 2015, March 2015, April 2015, May 2015, June 2015, July 2015, August 2015. Madam Speaker, and that is what is reflected when the IMF tells us that they see progress, and they saw progress going forward, Madam Speaker. So don't try to come here and convolute your argument by saying what is reflected in 2016 is not really what work was done prior to that. Madam Speaker, another myth that I want to dispel was when the minister spoke about the work of the current Minister of Planning and Development having to find a home for the CSO. Madam Speaker, if you would allow me, Trinidad Guardian, Saturday, August 1st, 2015, headline, CSO gets new home. But again, it is a cherry picking by the member for Diego Martin Northeast that does not reflect the truth of what really occurred under the CSO. So they ran the CSO into the ground, did no work, review and consider for all the years that they were there, came in, and CSO had a home under People's Partnership Government by Kamla Prasad Bisesa and a member for Caroni Central, then the Minister of Planning and Development. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill has been long in coming. The member for San Fernando West took us back as far as the birth of Christ. And if that was any indication in terms of both the government and the opposition really wanting to see this bill come into effect, it tells the story essentially of how we got here and the length of time it took for us to get here. Madam Speaker, off the bat, I would like to share with you another failure of the member for Diego Martin Northeast not being able to go into the clauses of the bill, which really was a sort of philosophical, airy-fairy blame game that the minister engaged in, as opposed to how we can strengthen the bill, because government has already indicated that this bill will go to Joint Select Committee. Madam Speaker, right off the bat, as I've indicated, the clauses that the opposition is particularly concerned about but is not limited to is Clause 11, Clause 12, Clause 21, Clause 29, 33, 34, 35, and 36. Madam Speaker, we are very mindful on this side of the importance of the establishment of the National Statistics Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, Madam Speaker, a lot of the work that informed this particular bill, as I mentioned before, was done by the member for Caroni Central in a different dispensation. Madam Speaker, essentially, this National Statistics Institute of Trinidad and Tobago will be concerned with data collection, national census, status of sectors in our society, monitoring and evaluation, hopefully an element which I've heard no one speak about as yet, hopefully an element of research and development. It will provide a framework of cohesion among state agencies, ministries, and departments. Madam Speaker, something the Honorable Attorney General said earlier in the piloting of this bill really struck me. And the AG said that in December of 2016, Cabinet took the policy decision that would inform the position of the government with respect to this bill. The Honorable Attorney General referred to two bodies, ECLAC and CARTAC. Now, these are two organizations that the Honorable Attorney General would have indicated that would have assisted government in terms of technical support and advice. Madam Speaker, this would have occurred in December of 2016. Very little or actually no mention on the side of the government with respect to the Caribbean Model Bill with respect to the National Statistics Institute. So therefore, no information coming out from that model bill was contained in the drafting of this particular bill. That worries me tremendously, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, CARICOM saw it necessary to bring about this model bill. And essentially, Madam Speaker, the CARICOM model bill for the National Statistics Institute, as I said, would have been established in 2016. Now, when you look at the CARICOM member states and the legislation that guides member states with respect to their National Statistical Institute, in some jurisdictions, it goes far back as 1962, 1965, and the most recent one that I could have found was in 2006 with respect to Belize. Madam Speaker, it was a clear roadmap articulated by CARICOM for member states to establish a reliable and competent body that would conduct data collection, research, and programs designed to inform decision-making by governments in the region. Now, Madam Speaker, when I saw this model bill presented by CARICOM, I decided to do a comparison in terms of the bill that we have before us that government has brought. And there are fundamental differences, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the CARICOM model bill was very mindful, and both the member for San Fernando West, the member for Diego Martin Northeast, and also the member for Caroni Central touched on political interference, one, but insulating the National Statistical Institute from any political interference. And that was one of the fundamental pillars of the CARICOM Model Bill of 2016. Madam Speaker, it protected the role and responsibility of the Director General, or as it is referred to in the CARICOM Model Bill, the Chief Executive Officer, from being beholden to any politician by the process of their appointment. Madam Speaker, when you look at the CARICOM Model Bill, in Clause 5, subsection 2, the CARICOM Model Bill shall consist of the board shall consist of no less than 9 or no more than 15 members appointed by the head of state. Now, Madam Speaker, even as a junior parliamentarian, when I first came into the House, it took a little while for me to get familiar with the language of the legislation. And sometimes when you hear president, you thought it was actually the head of state solely making that decision, not realizing it was the cabinet of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So I looked instantly to see what was the intention of saying head of state here. And it explicitly mentions, Madam Speaker, that there's a distinction between head of government, cabinet, and head of state. For those countries who are not republics, the Governor General will then fall within this purview, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the use of the word consultation in terms of the President or the Governor General consulting the minister is also in the CARICOM model bill. The use of the word consultation is important because it does not mandate the head of state from taking the advice of the minister on the appointment. Madam Speaker, I think that is a fundamental point that is not contained in our bill. And really, it is a point that I hope will be fleshed out when this matter goes before a joint select committee. Madam Speaker, it also does not say head of government. Therefore, it gives the element of impartiality and objectiveness as opposed to someone who is in line with the views of the head of government. Madam Speaker, the CARICOM model bill, for me, it ensured that the politician did not have the final selection. And that is a fundamental point, Madam Speaker. It did not have the final selection of board members, and more importantly, the chairman of the board. And therefore, there was a safeguard and a protection from abusing the system and the data contained in the National Statistics Institute from active politicians. And the Honourable Member for Diego Martin Northeast touched a bit on that, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, in order for us to insulate the board, the chairman, we have to ensure that the hand of the political directorate is not involved in the appointments. And that is something that we will not shift from, Madam Speaker. And therefore, when you look at the CARICOM model bill, we could have seen the sense when CARICOM drafted this model bill in ensuring that if you wanted transparency and integrity in the process and in terms of the establishment of this National Statistical Institute that will provide data in many different sectors, this was the reason for that protection, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in Clause 8, subsection 1 of the CARICOM model bill, the board appoints the advisory committees. Madam Speaker, do you know what is contained in the bill before us? The chairman, who is selected by the minister, the political directorate, as it is in this bill, the chairman, under sole discretion, will select the advisory committees. Madam Speaker, there is no way, absolutely no way, the opposition will agree to that. And I'm putting government on notice when it goes to the Joint Select Committee. The provision that is contained in the CARICOM model bill is one that we recommend. We are not limited to it, but we recommend that we take a look at it, Madam Speaker. You see, Madam Speaker, the National Statistics Institute of Trinidad and Tobago gives this responsibility, as I said, explicitly to the chairman of the board in this legislation. If we let them have their way, the government would hand-select the board, the chairman, and then the chairman appoints the committee. So, Madam Speaker, what essentially you have is himself to himself. Where's the safeguards for checks and balances when the member for Diego Martin Northeast, the Honourable Attorney General for San Fernando West, speaks about ensuring that we have impartiality and we have confidence in the data being generated by the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, as I said, this was not the case in the CARICOM model bill. The chairman was not chosen by the minister, but rather the head of state, and the board as a whole selects the advisory committee by majority vote. Madam Speaker, in any democracy, now I know my friends probably have a problem with democracy, seeing their position they have taken with Venezuela. But, Madam Speaker,
Madam President.
I think you could find another way to say that and move on. Just withdraw it, find another way to say it.
Madam Speaker, I will not say that members have a problem with democracy. I withdraw it. Madam Speaker, you see, in a democratic process, you will take a majority vote because these advisory committees will determine the work of the board in the areas of finance, in the areas of human resource management, in the areas of looking beyond the scope of Trinidad and Tobago and looking at areas in which we can strengthen our National Statistics Institute.
Honorable members, it's 4:30. We shall take the suspension now. Member for Princestown, you'll have 11 minutes and 55 seconds of ordinary time left. This House now stands suspended. We will resume at 5 p.m.